What is up? This is Wilson at the Neutral Access Club. In this video, I interview marketer and career coach Ben Preston. Ben is a YouTuber, content creator, and author of the book Harness Your Butterflies, a young professional's metamorphosis to an exciting career. And in his book, he shares answers to many questions related to career development, career management. And in this interview, Ben shares his wisdom on how to perform effective career management, how to find fulfilling opportunities, and how to use your strengths as your competitive advantage. We also dive into his book, Harness Your Butterflies, and answer many of the questions that I've had as a young professional. So without further ado, here is Ben Preston. Ben, thank you for joining the Neutral Access Club. I'm honored to have you here today, getting you up a little bit early, but I'm really excited for our conversation today because you have lots to share. So how about you kick us off? Let us know about your story, where you are professionally, and how you got to where you are right now.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I always love having conversations, especially about career development. So my name is
Yes.
Ben Preston. I'm an author. I'm a YouTuber. I work full time, not in career development, which is maybe interesting. I work in marketing full time, but I've always been passionate about career development and just I've always been kind of that person that my friends come to and they say, "Hey, like, how do I do this? What's the thing with like, how do I navigate this? How do I have this conversation?" Or all that type of stuff in relation to their job. So for me, I was like natural progression. And then eventually I wrote a book and then launched the YouTube channel. And it's kind of where I'm at today. So I work with a lot with the different clients and people that have issues navigating their career, figuring out what their passions are, all that good stuff. So I know we'll talk about a little bit of that today, but yeah, so that's kind of a little bit about me.
Of course, no, that's a great quick intro. We definitely have a lot to share, especially about the book and all the work you do. But yeah, so you do a lot of career development, career coaching. And I'm curious though, so I am about 5 years out of school. And ever since, even joining school, I've always done things that comes when it comes to my career, making progress one way or the other. But I'm curious about your thoughts about when is the right time to do something for your career. Is it right after college? Is it 5 years in? What is your take on this?
Yeah. So I have the short answer is it depends on your psychology. The long term response is there was a psychological research that was done to identify passion and purpose. So we all work obviously for different reasons. We get different incentives out of our jobs. We get paychecks, we get benefits, we get healthcare, we get all these, maybe it's the city you want to live in. So there's a whole slew of reasons why people have the jobs they have. Sometimes it's more practical, sometimes it's not. But at the end of the day, everyone gets to the point where they either stay at a job or leave a job based on their excitement and passion and fulfillment that they have in that job. If they don't have it there, they find it somewhere else. But at the end of the day, that's the point when a lot of people start asking the question, should I stay at my job? Should I develop my career? Because otherwise it's just a natural progression. So there's a psychological research study that actually indicates that there's two different types of people. One type of person where they can get into a job and they can be happy there no matter what, they can make the best out of it. Those people tend to stay at their companies for years and years and years. And I have a lot of friends that are like that, where they get into, my one friend is a landscape architect. I love using her as an example, but she got into landscape architecture. I was concerned for her because I was like, how can you jump into a job that you don't know if you're going to love it for the rest of your life, kind of thing? That's a very specific job to get into, and you have to get a master's, and it was this long-term process. She's been at the same company for 10 years.
Hmm.
Me, on the other hand, I had a little bit more of a dynamic approach, which is the second category of people, which is they like to bounce from job to job. They like to find the passion. They like to find the purpose, and they aren't necessarily glued to a specific job. So to answer the question, it depends on what type of person you are. If you are the first type of person where you're happy anywhere, it's a lot easier, I think, to develop your career because you kind of create a trajectory within your organization, or you
Hmm.
figure out what are the career ladders in your organization, you build from there. And then if you're kind of the other type of person, if you're more like me, and I assume maybe like you, I've noticed a lot of creators kind of fall into this category where you are more excited to chase something, or you're more excited to work towards something and bounce from thing to thing. Um, those type of people tend to find fulfillment in the long term, but it's a little bit less of a seamless process at the beginning. So depending on what type of person you are, you should be developing your career anyway, but the strategies that you take when you're developing those depends on the type of person that you are.
Yeah, no, this is great. And I do have some follow-up questions for both both type of person because I don't know where I fall in between, but I'm curious though, for those who try to find some happiness out of what they have and try to make the best of what they have and stay the long term, what is career management for those people? Because I would normally think, career management is perhaps you're switching jobs, you update your
Mhm.
resume, you update your experience on LinkedIn or things that you have done and everything. Is career management only relevant with switching jobs?
Um, that's usually the time when it's most prevalent for people to think about what they want to do. I am always somebody who likes to think through what is my next step look like, what does the next five years look like. What I have found though is a lot of those internal monologues tend to happen for people who are dissatisfied where they are. If you are, let's say, indifferent, or if you are satisfied where you are, or maybe you have a side project that's fulfilling. So for me, as an example, I work full time. I love doing marketing, but obviously I have a side thing, so I do a lot of other stuff for YouTube and my book. So I get a lot of fulfillment out of both of those. So my career management journey looks a little bit different depending on, if I'm applying for a corporate job, if I'm working with other creators, or if I'm trying to do sponsorship stuff, it looks very different. So I'm constantly doing career management, and I would advocate that everyone do career management, but it's typically more motivating to have that kind of push if you are unsatisfied where you are. So I think it's a lot easier for people to force themselves or to motivate themselves to do career development. So, and that typically comes from people not knowing what they want to do or where they want to go when they want to say, oh, I need to start thinking about what I want to do with my career. But it comes from a place, it is motivated from a place of dissatisfaction versus excited about where I'm going. Because if you're excited where you are, you're excited where you're going. The question doesn't necessarily come up of, well, now what do I do? What do I do next? Because you're living in the moment, you're living what you want to do. So the conversation's a little bit different. But that's usually, you see a lot of people who are dissatisfied, who want to leave their jobs, are usually the ones who are talking about career management the most.
Right. And then so for those who do stay that they're not necessarily unsatisfied with their job, what does that look like? What does career management look like to them? I would say learning a skill, improving on their project
Mhm.
management, taking a course. Is that along the lines of what you think?
Yeah, I usually tell people to start with their strengths, because to me, that's the part that you double down on. And I don't mean like, oh, I'm good at coding or I'm good at whatever, but what are your kind of interpersonal things that you do really well, better than anybody else? Almost like, what's your competitive advantage? If I'm using a business term, what's your competitive advantage, and then doubling down on that. But usually if people start with their strengths, and I have in my mind, I have three different ways that you can do that, you can find your strengths, but I usually say that's the very first step when you're looking at career management, career development, is always starting with, what am I good at? What is the strength that I bring to the table? Because then it almost paints a picture, or it's like a filter when you look at your career development, or you look at where you're going and what you want to do. If you can look at it through a filter of, here's what I'm good at, or here's what I bring to the table better than anybody else, it makes it so much easier to almost turn down opportunities that don't fit that. So if you want to go into a job where you're saying, I'm good at this, and this job over here won't allow me to do any of those things, then that's immediate no. Versus if you find a job where you're like, I'm really good at this, and it fits maybe three out of the five things that I'm really good at, because that's where people get fulfillment out of, is what they're good at. So if you can identify what your strengths are, that's usually the first step that I advocate people do.
Yeah, no, this is great. I totally love all the wisdom you're sharing in here.
Yeah.
This is great. So now for the second person, right? So you said there's a more dynamic person that
Yeah.
is willing and able to pursue different opportunities in a 10-year span and doesn't pursue staying long term in a company. For them, it's really easy to find a job, but finding the job is another thing.
Mhm.
What do you think is what it takes to find a job that brings fulfillment for those people that perhaps they may want to stay a little bit longer in a company, or you know just be more fulfilled in general as a professional?
Yeah. So are you talking about for people that like to stay in jobs a long time, or are you talking about
No,
people that
that they like to, switch jobs and,
that
more frequently than not. How do they get to find the job where they say, okay, no, this is a place where I want to stay
yeah.
long term?
I like to use the analogy. Do you cook at all?
Yes, yes.
Sometimes I love cooking. I'm like me and my grandma when I was little, we'd always used to come up with these really ridiculous recipes and cook things. So in my mind, it's a cooking analogy where you if you're cooking and you have, let's say, certain ingredients that you like working with, and you come up with these cool dishes and you say, oh, I'm going to try this. Sometimes it doesn't work out and sometimes it does. But when you're in that state of, I'm going to try this spice this time, or I'm going to try this, cooking it this way this time, you are able to experiment and come up with your preferences. What are the things that you like to eat? What are the things you like to cook with? How do you like to cook? All of these things. So when you think about it in the context of experimentation or coming up with what are the spices you like to use, applying that to your career and saying, how can I look at every single part of what I'm doing as an experiment? So I'm at my first job. Let's say that I'm cooking with chicken. I said, I don't like cooking with chicken. I want to try steak. You go to your next job, you're cooking with steak. It's kind of like that where you kind of have to apply yourself or experiment as you're going, and then find what are the things that are not necessarily going to give you to me, like a dream job isn't a destination, it's a feeling. So it's a feeling of passion, so you can feel passion anywhere you are, any time of the day. Just like when you're cooking, you can find one element of that job that you really like cooking with, or I'm mixing up my analogies, but you can find the one part of that recipe that you really like. You can find one part of that job that you really like. But when people talk about the job, or when they talk about the ultimate, I want to find my purpose, I want to live my passion, they're not talking about one specific job. And I think that's something that people sometimes get mixed up, because when we're younger, everyone tells us you need to find the job that you want to do forevermore. And the world is moving so fast that I don't think that there is that one job, because it's going to constantly evolve as you do. So you can find what is the job that's going to satisfy me today. And maybe in a year or 2 years or 10 years, you don't want to work there anymore, but you're searching for the feeling of fulfillment, the feeling of excitement. And to be able to get to that point of, if you're like me and you're bouncing from job to job to job, you want to say, what are the elements or what are the components of the recipe that I'm looking for, and then bake that into your next job. Even if that job is not fulfilling for you for 5 years, maybe it's exciting and fulfilling for 3 years, and then you can move on to something else once you're done. But that's kind of how I look at it, as experimentation. Figure out what you like, what are your preferences, bake that into your job search. What are the things that you want to do? And then just keep in mind that everything is evolving. You as a person are evolving. So you can find what you want to do in the long term, even if you're not at that specific job for 40 years.
No, this is great, and I think back of, I'm an immigrant. My mom, we came from the Dominican Republic, and my mom, her dream is that I grow up in a company for the rest of my lives, because that's the
Mm,
American dream for her.
yeah,
And that's not necessarily the case. Things have changed so much, so recently, and people do not, remain loyal for that long if they're
yeah.
not getting fulfillment out of that job position. But I'm curious though. Um, in the case of people who do like to pursue that fulfillment one way or the other, how do you think they get to explain those jumps? Because I feel like to this day, still the industries will look that jump from company to company every 2 to 3 years as a negative thing. So how,
Yeah.
how do you get around that?
It depends on the industry that you're in. Marketing, for example, when I was going, my first job was actually at an advertising agency out of school, where jumping jobs every 9 months was not really uncommon. Like people would jump, they'd stay at a job for 9 months, you'd jump, you'd find, typically if you're in an industry, and I know engineering, architecture, I'm just thinking through my friend who's a landscape architect, they have to have 5 years or 3 years of experience before they can actually get their next levels of certification and stuff. So some industries are a little bit trickier in terms of jumps. If you are in an industry that requires a jump, let's say, or you personally, you're like, I need to jump to a different job, I think there's a lot of different ways that you can explain it, because you're talking to, let's say, a recruiter, or if a hiring manager asks you, there are a lot of kind of explanations for why you might jump from a job. You can say, I wasn't feeling fulfilled and it's not worth my time. It's not worth their time to have me if I'm not excited to stay there. That's an option. I worked for a company where I was there for 9 months or 8 months, and I jumped because it was highly unethical. The person who I was reporting to was, I felt, was breaking the law all the time. So that jump, when I moved jobs, I said, I was interviewing and I said, there was a lot of unethical stuff happening there. And for me, it's not worth ruining my morals over something like that. So I think depending on the industry that you're in, you're really interviewing with a person. So as long as you're not just jumping jobs because you want to jump a job, like, you kind of have to be a little bit responsible about it. But the explanation of it really comes from, if you can tie it back to your kind of core principles and almost turn it into a positive in an interview, let's say. So in the example that we are just talking about, if you're interviewing with somebody, they said, oh, well, it's weird that you jumped a job after a year, or what, it's weird that you jumped after 2 years. There's a lot of ways that you can bring it back to your principles. So what, is it something where you felt it infringed on your ethics? Did it not meet your passion? Did it not meet your purpose? Did you feel like you weren't growing? Was it something like that? So if you can figure out kind of what the principle is that made you, or that kind of motivated you to move, and then turn that into a learning lesson for the recruiter. So in my example, it was, I think I have higher standards or higher ethical standards than what the company that I was working with. And then when I had that conversation with the recruiter, they're like, we love to hear that, because it shows them that you have a grasp on your own interpersonal skills and your own kind of interpersonal way of looking at things. So long way of saying, if you can tie it back to your principle and then present it in a way to the recruiter where they can understand where you are as a person, and then it helps them kind of dive deeper into your skill set and be able to look at you from a different lens.
No, that's
Yeah.
actually a very good point, because the more honest you are when it comes to these things, the better it is, because the recruiters then is able to see whether you're a fit to a position or not, whether a company culture is good for you or not, depending on what they know. And the more honest and open you are about your previous experiences and what you're looking for sure it will be more beneficial in the long run. But now, let's say principles and morals aside, a lot
Mhm.
of people jump because of money. They
Yeah.
want to get paid a lot more. Perhaps they don't feel valued or compensated accordingly to their responsibilities of the previous jobs. How do you explain that?
It's a little tougher. If you switch jobs for a paycheck, there's not as much wiggle room. You're kind of, I would just say, interpersonally, if I was saying I don't like this job because I make X amount, and if I go to this other job I can make more amount, I would not be surprised if that person wanted to switch jobs again after a year because they're unhappy. Not because money is an issue, but I would have a feeling, if I was, let's say, interviewing that person, or if that person was, if I saw that they had been jumping, it's because of money. If they were looking for pay raises, those people typically, they call it golden handcuffs, where you get too successful or you get too high up in a job to the point where you can't leave because you make too much money even though you're unhappy. So that is the trajectory. If you just jump because of money, not to say, so I want to preface this with saying, you should be getting paid what you're worth. And if you're getting paid significantly less at the company you're at, you need to find another job. But in the event that you are a habitual person that jumps from job to job, those people tend to be unsatisfied anyway, because they get too much money and then they hate their jobs, and there's not a lot of wiggle room because they can't go down and they can't go laterally because they're already too far up the pipeline.
Yeah.
Um, if you are in the case of jumping jobs because you want more money, I would say, first of all, slow down. And if you're trying to explain the jump and the recruiter isn't buying what you're selling, it's probably not a good time for you to jump. And if you're jumping because you're unhappy, you need to stop that, because more money isn't going to make you happier. You need to be able to find what are the things, go back to what we talked about before, of finding your strength, finding out what type of personality you have. Maybe you start a side hustle, maybe you do something else to bring in that fulfillment if you're
Mhm.
unhappy. But it's a dangerous cycle to be that kind of person. And it's not easy to explain to a recruiter. And recruiters, depending on the industries, will be able to see right through it. So if you're in that case and you make too much money and you want to interview because you're unhappy, I would say, don't interview right now. Spend the next 6 months figuring out what you want to do, what's exciting to you, and then do more of that while you're working full time. Because otherwise you're going to continue to be unhappy and continue to want to jump
Yeah.
just to make more money.
More money probably is not the solution. So it's
Yeah.
good
Well,
to
and the paradox is, like, people want more money, but you don't you don't make, I mean, you can go down that golden handcuffs route where you start working and you get really
Hmm.
successful and then you are making a lot of money doing something you hate, or you spend time doing what's interesting to you and you become really good at that and then you become successful doing that. So like taking success off the table, you're going to be successful either way, let's say. But the difference is, do you want to be successful and unhappy or successful and happy, even if it takes a little bit longer to figure out what you want to do? So it's kind of take more time to figure out what's interesting to you, what you're passionate about, and start investing more in that.
Oh, great, great. No, that's pretty good. But now let's switch gears a little bit. So let's say there's people that know that they want a career change.
Mhm.
They know they want to change for their lives professionally. They want a new opportunity that gives them more fulfillment. A lot of them, they don't start making those changes out of fear, out of anxiety for those same changes. They don't
Yeah.
want to change their routine, or they don't want to change, get out of the comfort zone to learn a new skill and then eventually apply it. Especially when you consider the fact that we go to college for 4 years to learn something and do that for the
Mhm.
rest of our lives. I I would expect some people to have some imposter syndrome where they can just do like a 3 month boot camp and then get a job based on that. Like, how have you ever experienced something like this where you're out of fear, you don't take action? And so, what do you recommend people to start taking actions like right now?
Yeah, um I think almost everybody that I have met just professionally, no one really knows what they're doing. Like you you can work with the, I mean, do you agree with me? Like it's kind of
Yes.
everyone's just kind of winging it. There's people who have historical experience where they can say, I have been doing this for 30 years and I know how it's done. And it's like, yeah, probably, but also, so I have worked with marketers who have done that where they say, I've been doing this for 30 years, I know what I'm doing. And I'm like, but Google wasn't around 30 years ago. So unless you're
Mhm.
keeping up with trends, you don't really know. So everything is changing so quickly. No one is ever, and marketing is a good example just from where I came from. There is no such thing as a marketing expert, because if you were to say that you are an expert in marketing, you would say I know everything about everything. And there are people who have dissertations on one specific component of one specific thing. Like it's so diverse, it's so wide, it's so expansive that no one's ever an expert in anything. And
Mhm.
if you have an interest or a passion toward one aspect of your job, focus on that. I mean, everyone's going to go into something not knowing how to do stuff. I mean, when I started YouTube, if you watch some of my earlier videos, they're embarrassing. Like they really are not very good because you're just not very good at it. So, but that
Yeah.
isn't something to say that you shouldn't keep doing it. So, kind of the imposter syndrome is very real. I think the more that people feed into it, the more power that they give it. So if you think about, oh, imposter syndrome, I'm crippled by the amount of stuff that I don't know. The more that you feed into that, or the more that you give your thought, I don't know how to phrase this. Basically, the more that you invest in it, the more that you create a limiting belief out of it. And it's a
Mhm.
lot harder to unpack a limiting belief that you've given airtime to if you instead you're able to just kind of say, I'm going to take one small step at a time and be able to do that. Eventually you'll get the momentum. In terms of the motivation part of it, I usually say, I mean, this is my own personal stuff. I mean, this is kind of how I wrote my book too, but when you're being motivated to do something, you're being pushed, versus inspired or inspiration where you're being pulled to do something. So I usually like to say, if people want to, let's say, start a side hustle, or they want to do something cool, or they want to take that next step to their job, or they want to do something, if you can figure out the part of it that inspires you, it's going to be a lot easier for you to hook into that and let it pull you, versus having to push something heavy. Like you're pushing imposter syndrome, you're pushing all of this stuff that you don't think you're good enough, versus, oh, I'm inspired to do something, oh, I think that part of it's really cool and that part of it's really cool, and this, this component of it is something I'm really good at, or this, I've seen other people do this, I could do that too. That to me is a lot easier, and it's a lot more successful in the long run if you can figure out what's the part of it that's inspiring you and then hook into that and follow that through. It tends to pull you rather than you having to push all of this stuff down the hill, kind of thing.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great way to put it. And I do have two kind of like two frameworks to follow up on that. So
Yep.
the first one is, So being inspired into and being hooked into the things that you truly enjoy. So I guess you can use that as a catalyst to find new opportunities that
Mhm.
uh, perhaps, let's say I work in customer service, uh, find the parts of my job that I really enjoy, and then find other opportunities that have those same responsibilities. I should say, is
Mhm.
that a good way to pursue a new career, perhaps starting doing that research?
Yeah, if you know that that's the actual function that you want to go down. So the example that you just had with customer service, there, if you think about it in terms of like technical skills and soft skills,
Hmm.
technical skills are like the things that you need to be able to do your job. So from a marketing standpoint, I need to understand how LinkedIn works. I need to understand how content works, design works, all these other things. So the technical part from a customer, let's say a customer service role, I need to understand how to work with difficult clients. I need to understand problem solving on the fly. I need to understand all that stuff. So technical skills, if those are skills that are inspiring to you and those are things that you
Hmm.
want to continue developing, keep going down the function of customer service. But there might be elements of customer service that you really like that you would want to apply somewhere else. So if, let's say, if you look at the soft skills related to it, you would need a lot of personal skills. You need really great communication skills. You would need a lot of patience. You would need the ability to work within an organizational structure. You need to be able to manage up. You need to be able to manage down. There's a lot of soft skills in that relationship too. But those skills, if any of those, let's say in a customer service setting, if any of those skills, those soft skills are inspiring to you, those are a transition. You can put those anywhere. You can put those in a marketing job. You could put those in a recruiting job. You could put those in literally name every single job function that there is. So that's kind of the balance is if you know what function you want to go down, using the doubling down on those technical skills is extremely helpful because it helps you not only find fulfillment in your job, but helps you move up a lot faster. If you don't like customer service, let's say as a function, but you know that there's parts of that job, let's say little sprinkles of that recipe that you really like, you can take those elements and look for those in different recipes or different companies. To go back to our earlier analogy, you can apply those to different companies, and maybe you jump from an industry, maybe you're in healthcare and you want to be in a different industry, or maybe you are in a certain function and you want to be in a different function. You can make that jump, and you but to go back to your earlier point, you would look and say, these are the things in the job description that I really enjoy, and I'm going to go toward those, or I'm going to be inspired to make that leap because they have the things that I want. But you kind of have to do the grunt work of figuring out what are the things that I actually am good at, because it's as a default, it's a lot easier for us as people to say I don't like this and I'm going towards something else that isn't this, versus oh, I don't like it, but these are the parts that I do like, and I'm going to use that as my filter when I look for something new.
Great. No, that's a great way to put it. But I would imagine, and this is the second framework that I was
Yeah.
trying to follow, is it easier to be inspired by following things are your strengths versus your weaknesses? Which one do you think it's easier to be pulled upon
Mhm.
versus pushed on when it comes to strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, if if you ignore your weaknesses for too long, it's extremely motivating. Because the more unhappy that you are for the longer period of time, this is why people, when they complain about their careers, they like, I've been in this dead end job for 3 years. It's like, it's a pretty big motivator. Like, get out, get out, get out. So it depends. I mean, if you don't catch it early, you'll know. I mean, it'll be something if you're unhappy, if you're unsatisfied, and you don't do anything about it. Eventually, you're going to get to the point where you are either going to be fired, you're going to be laid off, or something's going to happen or you're just going to be miserable, or you're going to spend 5 years in your job and you're going to be wildly unhappy about what you're working on, and that will be enough motivation to get you to move.
Mhm.
I don't think it has to be that painful. I don't think it has to be that dramatic. I don't think it needs to get to that point for a lot of people. I think if you are content where you are, or if you're, let's say you're even indifferent where you are, and you find parts of something else that are exciting to you or that are inspiring to you, that's the part that I would follow. I mean, both methods are will get you to somewhere new successfully. It just depends on how much of a martyr that you want to be leading up to that point. Do you want it to be a bumpy ride, or do you want it to be a smooth kind of, transition from one thing to another without a lot of drama. So it just kind of depends on your personality.
No, yes, that's a great info. Now you do have a book that
Yeah.
I personally enjoyed, Harness Your Butterflies. I truly love the book because as I expressed before, I love books they're broken chapter by chapter. That I can just come, sit down, enjoy a cup of coffee, read a chapter in 20 minutes, and then gain something out of it. Especially when it comes to career and career management, there are a lot of topics in that area that not necessarily apply to me because that's not where I am. Excuse me, that's not where I am professionally. And it's great that I can just come into a chapter, address something that I'm perhaps wondering, perhaps something that I'm thinking of or having a challenge with. Come read a chapter, and I get some wisdom out of it instead of just following a whole book from the beginning. And then for me to understand the middle, I had to make sure that I remember the first parts. I don't have that kind of attention span. But it's a great book on career management, and I would like you to give us a quick, general information about the book before I dive into to more specific things about it.
Yeah, it's funny that you say that. Because that's actually the same reason that I don't like Game of Thrones, is because you have to like remember all of the details of everyone's names, and I'm just like, I don't know. So yeah, this is the cover, super bright. I don't know. It makes me happy when I look at it. But yeah, so I wrote it chapter by chapter, basically capturing one specific skill or one specific problem, walking through that problem, including examples and things like that, so people are able to read it. And it's not a very big book; it's a pretty quick read. But yeah, so the book's designed for young professionals who don't really know what they want to do, or they are in a job and they're like trying to figure out what is that next step, what are the skills that people are looking for, to take them from where they are to a place of feeling excited. And the reason that I chose the name Harness Your Butterflies is that feeling of excitement that you get in your stomach, where you have, let's say, butterflies in your stomach, and it could be nerves, it could be excitement, but really the only difference is your internal monologue about it. I love that. That's kind of my core, even when I'm working on with clients and things like that, is looking at what are the things that are inspiring to you, what are the things that are exciting to you, and then moving toward that. So all of the chapters in this book are designed around that idea of how do I find out what's exciting to me. We talk about how to find your strengths. We talk about limiting beliefs. We talk about there's a bunch of other stuff in here. How to have good communication skills, how to work with your boss, how to understand office politics, like all of that stuff is in here. And how do you kind of work within that framework to find the exciting components of it and then be able to work toward a career or a job that's really fulfilling to you?
Oh, that's great. It looks like you address a lot of the things that cause us
Yeah.
headaches in the workforce. So I truly enjoy that. I look forward to reading the rest of the chapters. I haven't read all of them, but there's one chapter that I really like, and it's chapter 6. What is your hot button?
Oh, yeah.
And I want to know, what is a hot button? I already know, but I just want you to describe it. What is a hot button? How do you identify them, and how do you manage them for professional success?
Yeah. So there is a really funny quote, and I don't remember who said it, but there was a great quote about your hot buttons, saying basically, if whenever someone's pushing your buttons, that term pushing your buttons, it's basically someone getting under your skin, or someone getting to like, getting you amped up in a really negative way. And there was a really funny quote about, if you're looking to find out what your hot buttons are, ask your family, because they're the ones who installed them. It's kind of like, in order to, it's so true though, right? Like if you think about, okay, if I were to go to my sister and say, what's the thing that you do that annoys me the most, she would be able to list 10 different things right off the bat. But yeah, so your hot buttons are things that get under your skin. And the reason that it's important to know that, and that's kind of a little bit about what I dive into the chapter, if you are unaware that something is bothering you or that something is a problem to you, you're going to act really irrationally when that comes up in the workplace. So if you're in a meeting, let's say, and one of my hot buttons, just to get personal for a second, is I hated when people would try to belittle me. So if I make a point and they either dismiss me or they make me feel like I'm not, not adding value, or if I, kind of putting me in that place where I was already feeling insecure about being an imposter. If we're talking about imposter syndrome, I was already feeling a little bit like an imposter. And then if someone else validates that I'm being an imposter, that would make me like really kind of annoyed or really amped up or just really not in a good headspace. But the way that I view that as a hot button is that's something that bothers me. It doesn't bother me as much now, but when that was a thing in meetings, someone might just say, "Oh, we're not talking about that right now," or "Oh, that's not what we're doing. Right? That's not helpful," or whatever the comment is. It might just be a comment that somebody just makes passively, not thinking anything of it, or maybe they just wanted to be a jerk or something like that. But for me, it hit really hard. And then my response to that is like overly dramatic, not necessary, or super confrontational. And it did need to be. And so there's parts of it where if you let your hot buttons run rampant, it becomes a lot harder for you to have a very professional, rational response. So there's a couple different strategies. The one that I write about, well, the one that I do most is if you think about, you almost have to like reframe things. So if you are thinking about, in my example, talking about someone trying to belittle me or push me down, it doesn't have anything to do with me. And this is how I reframe it. So if there's a way that you can reframe something and make it feel, and it's a feeling thing, if you can make it feel less intense than it is. So let's say something happened, someone said something to me. My way of processing it is instead of lashing out, I would say, okay, like maybe they have a point, but also it's probably not about me. They're probably having a bad time. My job here is X, Y, and Z. I provided my input and they didn't want it. And then you kind of have to reframe how you're viewing the confrontation. So that's the first thing. And that's the more immediate in the moment. How can I reframe this to not lash out and call someone something really rude or negative? The other thing is if you can figure out how to slow down the momentum of that level of that hot button, for example. So typically, if someone hasn't pushed your hot button in a while, you usually forget that they're there unless someone comes in and pushes it and says, "Oh, this is the button that I'm pushing," and then you get all ramped up. The more that you can kind of talk down those hot buttons after you know what they are. And this is something that I've done over a long period of time, knowing that I have it, let's say imposter syndrome for certain things. So let's say for YouTube as a really good example, when I started, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. But then as I'm building out more of what I'm doing, or as I'm looking at my approach to things, I said, you know what, I might not understand everything, but I'm starting to learn it a little more than I did before. And it's getting better. And I've seen that things are working and I see that this is a positive response. Or finding the validation that kind of pushes down that hot button so that it's no longer active. That's like more of the long-term strategy, but figuring out how to slow down that the momentum of that negative kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but if you can figure out a way to make the button less impactful when people push it, that's kind of the long-term goal.
Yeah, that's a great point, and it requires you to be very emotionally intelligent to dissipate those feelings that you have at the moment. It happens because in meetings in particular, that happens really often, especially when you're a younger member that perhaps don't have a lot of experience. You get invited to a meeting, you want to contribute to validate your time and presence in that meeting. And for you to hear those comments back not only fits into imposter syndrome that may already be present, but at the same time, it requires a lot of mental strength to for
Mhm.
you to see that situation in that lens, and see, hey, perhaps the person's going through a bad day or something. It's not my
Yeah.
fault, not take responsibility for that. But I think that we also have to hold people accountable. Perhaps right after that meeting, we talk to that person and tell them like, "Hey, I was trying to contribute to the discussion. Is there something that's in the way that's I feel like I'm not given the opportunity to speak up and speak my points. I was invited to the meeting. I would expect my contributions to be validated and welcome." So. Uh, I do believe in holding people accountable in that sense, and just having a conversation. Communication goes the long way. But I'm curious, so there's one sentence in the book that I really like. And remember, not every weakness needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
What does that mean? You already know what part of
Yeah.
the chapter I'm looking at. What does that mean? And given the fact that this sentence is inside the what's your button, hot button chapter, it's a hot button of weakness. And so does it need to be fixed?
Yeah. Um, I so when you think about, and this would be an interesting poll, I think, to have just with the people listening to this. When you think of, let's say, the most impactful, actually, let's try this. So, who are the most successful people that you would say in your mind, the three people that you look up to most right now? Like public figures or authors or speakers or whoever. Who would be the top three?
Do you want me to answer? Is that
Yeah, yeah,
a
yeah.
okay? So I would say Lewis Howes from the School of Greatness, Jay Shetty. Those people I look up to. And then I will also say third person. Okay, I'm blanking, but
Or
those
we'll
are
just do
two.
two. We'll just do two.
Let's just do it. Yes,
Yeah. My example in the book that I use is Steve Jobs and Oprah Winfrey because I think they're just so different, but they're both wildly successful.
yes.
When I talk to people about who they look up to, so if I were to say, can you list? We don't have to do this right now, but if I were to say, what are the strengths that those people have that make you admire them? You would say maybe they're good speakers. So for me, I would say Steve Jobs is super innovative. He's creative. He understands things. He's
Good
also an extreme,
marketer,
yeah, he's a great marketer. What are the strengths about Oprah Winfrey that make her super successful? Not necessarily
communication.
the same thing. She's super
Yeah,
empathetic. She's really good at communicating. She's not really good at product development. She's not really good at, so there's a lot of things that people are known for, but very rarely are they known for the things they're not good at. So it's not something where if I said, "Oh, I love Steve Jobs. He's a huge micromanager. Everyone hated working for him." Like that's just not something that happens. So it's funny when
you're
people
right.
talk about the things that they need to fix when they say, "Oh, I need to fix my weaknesses." It's like you're kind of wasting your time. First of all, unless it's, I mean, there are weaknesses. If it's something as part of your job that you need to be able to do, absolutely fix it. If it's something that you know is a gap that's preventing you from moving up, absolutely need to fix it. But if you're thinking about investing in, let's say, a strength versus investing in a weakness, people get double the output when they invest in their strengths because they're, first of all, excited to do it, and two, they're good at it. They know how to do it. They can get more out of it. Versus you might put in, let's say, an hour improving your weakness, and this is like not everything is this clean cut, but if you would put in an hour fixing your weakness and you maybe would get half the output because you hate doing it, it's not something that you're naturally good at, you have to kind of force yourself into it. So that in my mind is not something people don't, you do not have to fix every single weakness you have because your weaknesses is not what defines your success. The things that you do really well define your success. And I always use that example of who are the public figures that you look up to. So if I were to say Steve Jobs, yes, he has all of these really great things that he's good at. And he also had a lot of things he was bad at, but he also was able to build a team around him that was able to compensate for the things that he wasn't good at. And that's the part for me that I think when you're on a team, especially, you don't have to be good at everything because other people like doing the things that you're not good at.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it, especially when we put a lot of pressure on ourselves for having these weaknesses. And one of
Yeah.
the interview questions you always get is like, what are your strengths and weaknesses?
Mm-hmm.
How do you answer that question when, first of all, you perhaps don't know much about the job, at the same time, you may have strengths and weaknesses, but not all your strengths and weaknesses are relevant to that particular role that you're trying to fill.
Mm-hmm.
So I could be really bad at singing, but if I'm applying to an engineering job, how is singing relevant as a weakness, right? And
Yeah.
I think that's where how you go into detail about not every weakness needs to be fixed, especially if it's something that could be worked around, perhaps with the team members, perhaps by focusing more on your strengths that can create greater output and contributions to your team, your company as a whole. So yeah, I truly that was one of my favorite book chapters that I read so far. I truly recommend everyone to get the book for career growth, career success, career development. Where can they get the book?
It's on Amazon. It's on Barnes and Noble and Target and stuff too. I don't know. It's wherever you buy your books is where it's available. I always push to people either on Amazon, or if you do ebooks, it's on Apple Books and stuff too. So all of those places that you look for your book shopping
For
needs.
books. No,
Yeah.
that's great. No, for sure. Do you have any final words, any words of wisdom for us, for the audience about career or anything they want to share?
Yeah, I just want to say first of all, thank you for having me on. I always love talking about this stuff. Like I always get, I don't know if you could probably watch it back and
I
get
can
like super
send,
animated. I
yeah.
love talking about stuff like this. So, I guess the takeaway that I have is you're able to be successful doing anything that you want to do, but you have to start with finding what's exciting to you and working toward that. That would be, I think, the one takeaway that I would add.
Oh, that's great, and I love it. Short and simple, but straight to the
Yep.
point. So I love it. Thank you so much for joining the New Access Club, man. I truly enjoy all the work that you do. I can't wait for more as you grow into more stuff and career management, especially on your YouTube as well. He does have a YouTube, so make sure to check it out. And how can we connect with you other than YouTube? Perhaps LinkedIn. Is that a good?
Yep, LinkedIn is always a good one. Facebook and Twitter, I don't really use that much. Instagram, but yeah, YouTube and LinkedIn are kind of the big ones.
Okay, I'll make sure to link that down below in the show notes. All right,
Cool.
Ben, thank you for your time. I appreciate talking to you.
Thank you.